Thanks everybody for coming to the first of the Women's Network talks of the year. We've got 3 more later, or 4 more later on, one next month. But tonight is Emma's night. Emma, a lot of you will know, is an active club member, and she will talk about life and what led to her studying criminology, and she'll select experiences in the field. Emma has over 15 years experience in criminology and has managed over 500 people and with budgets over 20 million. She's worked as a human rights advocate and was the program manager for the Intelligence Counterterrorism and Major Events Command for the 2018 Commonwealth Games, which is pretty spectacular. So over to you, Emma. You need to unmute. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to the talk. I really appreciate it. I'm really quite chuffed there's so many of you here. So thank you. Very shortly, I'll start screen sharing. I have popped into the chat a poll. So if everyone would like to head to the poll, what I'm going to do for this speech today, as Val talked about, is I'm going to talk you through how I became a criminologist, essentially, what led me in my life to be a criminologist. But I also thought it might be quite useful to, one, chat about what criminology is, because I think that can be a bit of a mystery, but also maybe talk about what other people can get out of it, and how you can be a criminologist in your own life. And I'm also going to talk through examples of my career and what I've done and sort of how I've done it and things that were useful for me, in the hope that they'll be useful for you. The thing that I would say about this though, and this is a bit of a disclaimer at the start, it can be a little bit triggering. So my career is enormously interesting, but it does also come with a little bit of trauma. So I just want to really clearly state that if at any point you feel uncomfortable, just feel free to just take a break, or, I won't be offended at all if you leave the Zoom. But criminology is related to crime. And certainly there's been points in my own life where there's a particular reason why I'm a criminologist. So I just want to make that clear. And if anyone's got any problems, please let me know afterwards, or look after yourself. And I also would like to welcome you to Tier 3 across the UK. And I hope you find this interesting. And thank you for sharing your Friday evening with me. So I'm just going to pop the poll back in the chat again for those who just joined. And then I'm just going to share my screen and you'll see a word cloud and we can see everyone's responses together about what they think criminology is. And then I'll start my presentation. So just give me a moment. While I'm doing that, you guys can do the poll. Okay, can everybody see that poll? Hey, thanks everybody. Study, yep. Criminals.
That's snazzy, Emma.
Thank you. I actually saw this done in a presentation and I thought this was great. So also this is all anonymous, guys. I cannot see who's saying what. So feel free to be as honest as you like. People, psychology, society. That's a good one. That's really useful, guys. And this is actually really interesting because I was expecting some different responses. So I'm going to go through my presentation and talk about what I typically get told. So this is really interesting. I'm dealing with a very informed crowd. Oh, methodology. Did I already say that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. CSI. Yep. Thank you for your honesty, Val. You'd make a good criminologist. Awesome. I'll stop sharing now, guys. Thank you so much for participating in that. That was really handy. Oh, here we go. A little bit more. Society. I'm just going to hop into my presentation. Thank you. That was really useful. Okay, sing out if you cannot see this. This is the title slide, and then I'm going to move into what do you think of when you think of criminology, and you've all just answered that, so thank you. I thought I'd talk about what my mum thinks I do. So very much CSI or criminal minds, and people think I'm a very cool profiler, which is quite true. So a lot of coffee, you know how you see like a cop show and you have like donuts and coffee and all that sort of thing. That's definitely things that people have said to me, the very American stereotype. And also these are forensics which get sent out to assess crime scenes. I also, unfortunately, don't do any of that. This is mainly what I do, which is quite a lot of paperwork. Not really. I've had a really, really fun career, but I just want to talk about what criminology is at the start, get everyone on the same page, and then move on to the next part. And I also thought this is actually what I have done, which I think is really cool. And this is was at the Australian Women's Policing Conference, and the Irwins were there. So obviously I was like, let's get a photo. So that was when I was doing the Commonwealth Games, and we had all the chief commissioners from Australia there. And we're talking about women in policing, which I'll also touch on today. My experience as a criminologist, or everyone's experience, is very much shaped by who we are, how we grew up, what we look like, and where we come from. So that will be part of my talk today as well. But that was my experience having meeting the Irwins. And also at this conference, I didn't attach the photo to this slide, but we also did snake handling and lizard handling, and that was an interesting experience because that's not quite for me, I found out. So anyway. Very briefly, criminology is the study of crime, what causes it. I'm particularly interested in how to prevent it. The idea for me is that once you have this information, what causes crime, is that you can essentially help people and then prevent that crime. So it's a mix of psychology, science, and law criminology when you study it. It's pretty recent, so apologies, guys. I need to hide that, I think. Originated in Europe as more of a science. It is only a couple of 100 years old. The contemporary things you'll hear about criminology are from America. And I'll talk more about that later, because I actually studied in the States, and that really helped my understanding of where all the theories were coming from. Crime is also very dependent on where you live and its rules. So I'm sure we're all aware that different countries have different legislation. So what particularly like Singapore was very harsh on littering, for example. So there's things that are done differently in every country, and how countries treat crime. So for example, the death penalty isn't in most countries anymore. So it's very much dependent on, it's not automatically saying someone's a criminal. It's actually saying, well, how did they become a criminal to begin with, and what was that about? So now I thought I'd talk about me. Obviously, I chose an enormous flattering photo of myself when I was younger. So I'm a twin. So I did kind of want, as people were watching this presentation, to kind of think about what makes you you and what makes your experience unique, but also how you relate to other people. And so how I relate to the world is that I am very much, and always have been, part of a set. So whenever I think or do something, or when I was growing up and wanted to think or do something, I couldn't just do what I wanted because I had to bring somebody else with me. There was never like I can go and do this. I was always, my mum was a single parent. So, you know, it wasn't this thing where we'd split off. You always had somebody else there. And when you are constantly thinking about somebody else from a very young age, but also you share experiences and you share, you're going through things at the same time, but experiencing things differently. And for me, I probably really, it's only now that I've really worked out how much that has impacted how I collaborate and what I do, because I'm so used to thinking about other people. So that's my story. And that was the first photo I found when I looked up on Facebook, and I thought it was funny. So I thought you guys could, see my spectacular eating skills, which have very much improved at dinner time. I've also written down the bottom here what happened at 5 years old, because that also impacted how I interact with the world, and actually, ironically, probably made me a better criminologist, but was very frustrating to deal with. So when I was 5, I fell off a set of monkey bars and I smashed my nose, and so broke my nose. And so what that actually led to was 5-year operations. So for those people who don't know, your ears, nose and throat are all connected. And so by breaking my nose, I opened up holes in my eardrums. And it was only, I think, about 3 operations in that they worked out it was actually my nose. So then I got not a nose job, clearly, but I got my adenoids fixed, and then had my final ear operation. But what that means is I've only got 50% hearing left, because holes kept opening up. So quite a lot of my interaction with the world involves very much like body language, what people look like, not so much the words that come out of their mouth, because I couldn't do that a lot of the time. And I remember my friends in high school trying to whisper to me, and they just couldn't, and they get really frustrated. So I was a bit rubbish for sharing secrets with, but it really, it's quite interesting, because also from a criminology perspective, I'm always like, you know, I had to assess what a room was doing or what people were doing, because I couldn't interact with it otherwise quite a lot of the time, particularly as my hearing deteriorated as I was going through schooling. Again, from the criminology perspective, and what my experience is, and I hope you can find some of your own experience in it, is primary and secondary was, particularly secondary, was amazing fun for me, but I also realised I had quite a lot of really useful experiences that really, really helped me in my career. And I've had a fairly outstanding career, I would say. So, and I've had a lot of, it was really interesting doing this presentation, looking back and going, oh, what led to that and how did that work? So you can't see this here. I'm actually in the drama room. I'm the one should be on your right, the far right, if you can't see. That is my secondary school. What was really unique about this school was that it is a former trade school. So every single day we had to do trades. So we would, my first year was plastics, mechanics. We all had to do cooking and sewing. And I've forgotten the other one, I think it was woodwork or something. And then we did our regular classes. So that was really a unique and interesting experience, and enormously helpful and quite fun. The aim of this school previously had been to retain young men at school and make sure that they graduated. Trades are extremely large in Australia, so I should have started with that. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, sorry. And they lost my train of thought, sorry. Trades are really big in Australia, so we often have people, a lot of vocational colleges, and this wasn't a vocational college. The aim was to get everybody through school and make sure they also graduated with their school certificate, so they were set up for the future as well. And then they turned it into a secondary college the year before I arrived, but they kept all the trades. And so the really hugely helpful thing about this school is that you did almost everything under the sun. So we had airbrushing, photography, we had drama, we had automotive, so you had to learn to repair cars. We had, I'm trying to think, because there was just so many. The main one that I did, which is more important for my career, as we'll go through shortly, is firefighting. So I grew up in a bushfire prone region. So our house, I think, was 2 kilometres from where the entire city, like the entire area, burnt down on Ash Wednesday. So what part of our job was then is we all did a development program, and we all went on firefighting expeditions, and we'd go on firefighting camps, and we'd learn how to fight fires. And so that was a really, again, another unique experience, something that people could do at school, not at school, they could do outside of school, but something that was fed into my schooling and was enormously accessible. And so I still remember dragging bodies out of buildings, fake bodies. Please forgive me, like I was 15, I was not an established firefighter, but fake bodies out of buildings and dummies, like 70-kilo dummies, fire extinguishers and stuff like that. So we had to learn how to evacuate the school safely and be in charge of those evacuation procedures, and then also know what to do if a fire hit, which was absolutely fascinating and something I really rate. It was enormous fun and very useful. So that was something enormously unique about my secondary school, was all the trades. And then they'd also like chuck in like a debutante ball. So I did my debutante ball and we all learnt to dance. So it was just a really unique, enormously fun experience. And they also had a system where we weren't allocated years. We were allocated east, south, north and west. And so there were 4 mini colleges, and you were in a school, so you had to interact with older age groups. So you'd have like 2 year 7s together, a year 8 together, 9 and 10, and you'd all be sharing your experience, so it wasn't like a year level experience. And again, I feel like, not so much from a criminology perspective, but from a personal interaction perspective, enormously helpful, because you learn to interact with different grades. And obviously there's a lot of really interesting behavioural things that people coming straight from primary school. And I do remember, this is the embarrassing story of when you get all of the, I guess, people who graduated, and just to explain, sorry, we do from preparatory school to grade 6, and then we go from grade 6 when you're 12 to grade 7, and you start high school, and you do that all in a chunk, and you graduate in year 12. So you go from being in grade 6 and running around like the primary school playground, breaking your nose in my case, and then going to grade 7. And I remember we all walked in, and because everyone's older and you're not just interacting with like your year level, the very next day, because obviously we'd all gotten the feedback, we all had turned around, gone home and gotten some deodorant, because we all smelled apparently, because we weren't quite, you know, you knew you're fresh, and in some cases extremely fresh. And so we got all of that feedback because we were in a college with different age groups, and then you just saw an enormous amount of links. And I don't know what the brand would have been here, but for girls it was definitely Impulse, and I think I chose vanilla. I'm very certain about that, and I'm enormously confident I got the Spice Girls one. So that was another really interesting way that they set everything up. So, and I reflect on it now and go, that was actually really fascinating and really forced people to interact in a way that was quite different and unique. So, right, I wanted to do a bit of a poll with everybody on, have you done something illegal? Unfortunately, I am probably not good enough at this point because I've just came across this software to do that with you and still run this talk. But if anyone would like to own up in the chat, I'm going to stop screen sharing and have a very quick look at the chat. And because I have done stuff illegal, particularly when I was underage, so if anyone is confident and comfortable to share that, please do. Or you can send it to me directly. So I'll just stop screen sharing and have a quick look in the chat. I don't think. While I'm looking at that, I'm really happy to tell everybody that I did have a fake ID. So this will not probably surprise some of my friends on the chat. So I have looked a bit older for quite a long period of time, and I wanted to go out. And so my friends got me a fake ID and I went out all the time. Again, the police hated this story because I used to say this at the police and they're like, you cannot say this, you cannot talk about it. And I was like, yeah, but you know, like, it's fine, it's over now. But yeah, but I'll see. I'm not surprised that people aren't going to say if they've done something illegal.
No one's sharing.
Oh, that's a good one. This is David. I like, Nick, that you're not talking about what your issues are or what your potential things are. Someone just messaged me privately, said, and they stole something that they saw at an exhibition, but afterwards felt ashamed. And I'd be very interested, do you still have that makeup box? To the person who messaged me. David McMahon. Oh, that's unfortunate. Wonder how much the fine was. So David's written, while I was a student, having drunk too much, I accidentally didn't pay for my bus fare. I was arrested in Trafalgar Square, charged and fined. I would have thought they would let you off, actually, because this is part of the presentation later. They're meant to caution first, but anyway. Devil's lettuce, okay, good-o. Oh, 50 quid, that would have been a lot. Anyway, I'll pop back into the presentation. Okay, so the reason why I asked that question is, this will come along later, it's about, I sort of really want to make this point today. My experience of working for the police is that your brains technically develop until, keep developing until you're 25. So what we like to talk about in police, particularly a lot of the training now, is around cautioning where possible and not, you know, giving people something that might haunt them for the rest of their lives. And it's really interesting because I have run this in training sessions with police where you'll ask the question and say, right, well, you know, have you done anything illegal? And we're talking about when they deal with young people, you know, and were you caught? And would you be able to be sitting here now being a trainee police officer if you'd been caught and convicted? So there's quite a lot of crime prevention, particularly crime prevention stuff. We ideally want to divert people away from the criminal justice system. We don't want to send them into us. And it's really interesting, like, reflecting on what your own experience is, and in some cases privilege, about why you may have gotten away with something. So that's sort of the reason why I make that point, because most police, myself as well, and I'm fully, that's why I say this story, I absolutely did the wrong thing and I absolutely broke the law, but it didn't mean that I didn't get to have a career in criminology. So, and in fact, in some ways that actually made me really help and understand it better. And so in particular, if someone gets caught smoking a joint or, you know, stealing a Freddo from a shop or something like that, ideally you turn around and go, you know what, you've been caught and we're going to ring your parents or whatever it is, but we're not going to go any further, because the more someone interacts with the criminal justice system in a negative way, the more likely that pathway is to continue. So that's why we try to do that, and particularly in the context of things like Black Lives Matter and everything else like that. you ideally, you know, it can be quite biased where cautioning goes. And so that's the reason why I make that point. Sorry, I just got just a minute, Yesha. This is a hard story for me to tell. So part of the reason why, sorry, I realised how quickly I was speaking, I became a criminologist is that I grew up with quite a lot of domestic violence. It was a really unpleasant experience. And unfortunately, my grandmother also went to an aged care home, and which was the right choice for her at the time. But she moved into this really cute hotel, and not cute hotel, but a sister conving thing. And that was really great for her. She had a friend there. She really wanted to go. She was getting older and just sort of really needed that support. So she really enjoyed it. But then what happened was my grandma used to sneak out of the aged care home. So she's my hero for that. Used to sneak out of the aged care home. We'd get a phone call and say, right, she's at the shopping centre and she's having a coffee. We would then go to the shopping centre, get grandma, walk her back. And the more I reflect on that, the more I kind of go, well, hang on a second, why couldn't she go and get a coffee? But one day I wagged school and I went to see my grandma, and she had started deteriorating mentally by this point. But I went to her room and she's like, oh, Emma, I'll show you my room. And her bed was missing. And I was like, oh, Grandma, why is your bed missing? This is not great. And then it turns out that because she was a very active lady, my grandma had been, you know, active past the point of 7 p.m. or whatever it was, for her to go to bed, they would hide her bed from her. And I only found that out because I'd wagged school and arrived at a time when the nurses weren't expecting to see anybody. So because my grandma was so active, she then also they started taking her to the doctor more and more when she didn't need to go, and kept giving her medication that she didn't need. And I reflect on that. Sorry, it upsets me, but I really wish I'd done more. And I think that really, shaped quite a lot of my stuff going forward, because I remember talking to my mum about it. We talked to the nurses, but none of that was okay. And really upsets me thinking that that's how she died. So yeah, that was a huge part. And ironically, so I'll get over this in a second. Ironically, that really not helped, but later on in my career, I got the elder abuse portfolio. So needless to say, I was quite like, right, this is what we're going to do with this. So anyway, so sorry, that's a personal story, and I do apologise. I should have mentioned that before I went into that. Right, so then I go to university. Before I go to university, I was working quite a lot, and so I've worked part-time since I was 15. I went to Griffith, bartended, so I decided I would move to Queensland and go to university. So when I did that, Griffith was an amazing university. They were the best in Australia for criminology. I didn't realise at the time. I just wanted to move to Queensland and go somewhere sunny. And for people who don't know, Queensland is 2 hours away from Melbourne, flight time, so it's quite far away. Amazing university. I did psychology, law, statistics. The main point I want to talk about this university is that to get a high mark, you had to be publishable. So we were graded at every point at being publishable. And then we also had to do statistics every semester. So this was really useful. I'll get to this in a bit. I actually then became the research coordinator for the police. And I can absolutely tell you that knowing how to read statistics was enormously useful and enormously helpful. And that was a really unique part about that degree, because not all of them have it. And when you do criminology, you can do profiling. I didn't do it. It wasn't offered. But what I did do was work experience. And so I was always really fascinated by crime prevention through environmental design. So I sort of, it's how you assess and create spaces so they don't have crime in them. So London in particular is terrible for that. There's lots of alleyways. Whereas now when you design and build things, you try and make sure that you've got clear sight lines so you can see around the corner, so you can just see clear across everything. because one, people are less likely to commit crime if they think they're going to be seen, but two, it makes people feel safer. So, and it's very easy to install proper lighting and stuff like that. So that was my main interest at university. And it was a really, really great university. They had a lot of Order of Australian medals and stuff like that. And it was just really, really useful. And my work experience was fantastic because I got to go and do I went to interview with the council and they said, we don't think you suit this program, because I was quite outgoing, but then they said, we think we have another one for you. And so I went to work on a thing called Safer Venues, which was making all of the nightclubs safe in Brisbane. So that was really interesting. So I got to roll that out on behalf of Queensland Health for my work experience, which was amazing because it was such a good work experience. But also it was my first foray into working with the police, because I'd visit the venue during the day and assess it. But then at night time, you got to do nighttime bus. And that was just a very cool experience to have the police sort of essentially go in, raiding the nightclub when you're 20. And the backstory to this is also I was bartending at the same time. So that was my regular job and had been a bartender for a few years. So I knew venues really well. But also what they liked about it is that it was quite fair. So often when people would assess them, so for example, to stop people from putting drugs in your drink, they'd say you'd have to clean up a cup straight away. And as a bartender, I can absolutely tell you it's just not going to happen. So you can't simply just wait for someone to finish a drink and then go and pick it up. There's no business model that will support that. So it was really pragmatic things like that, that having that career actually really helped me do my work experience. But also by this point, I'm half deaf. I'm, bartending, which wasn't the best idea because my hearing got worse. But I was really good at reading people. So that actually really helped me in my criminology career later, because when you do hospitality, you really have to engage with people and you really have to deal with people's emotions a lot more than what you think. So it was a really good training ground for when I actually went and started working professionally. So this is cool. So I also studied in New York. They had scholarships. I said, yes, cool, I'll go. No one else wanted to go. I was the only one who put my hand up. The reason for that is that it was also around the time of the school shootings. If anyone can remember that, that was 2008, when America has very different gun legislation to us. So I toddled over there because I was going to New York and I thought New York would be quite safe. And I did my last 6 months at university at the State University of New York. Awesome experience, because quite frankly, a lot of the criminology theories didn't make sense. And quite frankly, I probably wouldn't use now, because there's different ones that apply to particularly America. And they don't really apply in the Australian context, or I would say in the UK context. You can take parts of them, but it was a really useful experience because being able to live there meant that I could understand it more. I understood scholarship movies more, because in America, they actually are funded, their schools, hopefully it's changed now, I've got to go back and check, but their schools were funded by property tax. So the richer the area is, the richer the school is. And so unfortunately, kids start from an enormously low bar. So they would be, if you're from a poor area, they would be going to schools with leaks in the ceiling. And I just thought, education is such an equaliser. And it was really interesting to be in the States and learn that, because one, it explain the scholarship movies, because that's why everyone cares so much, because they are trying to get out of a poor situation. But there's probably quite small chance for those people to get out of that situation. And that was really interesting to me. So the other interesting thing that I did is that I went to, for the people who are here from a military background, is I got to go to West Point Military Academy because I am a competitive netballer and handball is very similar. And so we played in the national championships for handball while I was there. So that was a really interesting experience. And so the photo on the left is me at the West Point Military Academy, and that is our sort of outfit for handball. So, and to our right is a cafeteria. I was trying to find very American photos. Turns out I can talk a lot. So very quickly going to breeze through this because I do want to leave time for questions. Went to the University of Melbourne after this, did work experience. Part of my education there was I had to pretend to be a terrorist for an assignment. So we had to think and feel like a terrorist, which was not the best feeling in the world, but useful. I wrote my thesis on is rape funny, how the legal system treats people defending women accusing people of sexual assault, which was fascinating because often lawyers, or particularly defence lawyers, really target women. The other thing I also need to say is people are much more across this now, but when I did this, it's 2009 I wrote my thesis, so that was 11 years ago, and things have changed quite a lot since then. But at the time, because in Australia, rape in marriage was still legal until 1985. So that was really, for us, there's quite a lot of sexual assault issues in Australia. I almost failed my thesis, was my point there. My teacher, I saw her once, and so I was writing my thesis on my own. Anyway, so that didn't turn out so well, but got there in the end. And then I did work experience at Victoria Police. So shimmied over there. And so then this is kind of where my career starts. I'm hoping I'll just talk for 5 minutes on that. And then I think we'll take questions because I took up more. I was slightly worried about not having enough time or not having enough to speak about. So I do apologise. So this is me, Victoria Police. I started there and joined the netball team very quickly. And this was amazing because I worked with operational police officers. Played netball with operational police females. So I had a bit of a crew, but also amazing when you're trying to do theoretical police work, and then I could test all my stuff on weekends away playing netball. So I worked for the police for 3 years, Victoria Police anyway, working in policy research, intel and training. So the aim of this unit, which was fascinating, which has stayed with me, is you would start with a policy or legislation or, an issue, you'd research it, you'd come up with some kind of policy, you'd use intelligence, and then you go and train police on it. That's really unusual. Often things are very stop and start. So if you work in criminology, it's like, cool, I'll do this thing over here. And we all really care about our research, but like, let's be honest, have you thought about other people? So went and did that, and then really amazing bosses who are really supportive. So I worked on the policing the mentally ill portfolio in particular. That was one of my main roles. And that one was about, we had a suicide by cop issue very frequently. And so people were getting them, deliberately antagonising to a point or threatening a police officer's life so that they would kill them and have get themselves killed in that way. So enormously challenging for everybody involved because none of that is good at all. And so we worked on a program to sort of prevent that. So that was fascinating because what they did is look at absolutely everything. And what the key takeaway from this one is that essentially police is a rank-based organisation. So you would go in and go, the second that a more senior officer arrives, they will take over. And so what that does not work with is mental health. So what then would happen is anyone who had a rapport, and it was really challenging for the sergeant, is to take a step back and go, you know what, you're in charge of this one. And so that was the key finding from that. And I was published in the Australian Psychologist for that as well, with the rest of the team that did that. That's world-leading research. For those who also don't know, that's also where mental health first aid came from. That came from Melbourne, Australia, and from our ambulance service there. And we were one of the first people to incorporate that. So we're the first people to go, right, how do we work with mental health, and how do we started some programs, like, so the response would be you'd send a police and a paramedic to an event, so that way people could get help and not necessarily just be arrested. So we'd be able to take them to the right place, because particularly if people have a mental health issue, a police station is not the right place for you. So this is where I also worked on the elder abuse portfolio and started all that sort of stuff. We used to assess, so I worked for the unit that used to assess, places that need security, like premiers' houses and stuff like that. Really fascinating stuff. Can't talk about that too much, obviously. I used to interview police recruits and also did training at the academy. And I used to do role playing for detective training. So we'd set up a scenario and we'd all play different roles. And what was really fascinating about that is that they all went differently depending on who was investigating. So interesting and such a fun time. sorry. I also played, we also got, this is just a bit of a glory thing, also got to play in the Florida Invitational. So we went and played against the Jamaican Defence Force playing netball. So that was really fun. And we had a, you know, a bit of a news article. So that son's there with the Australian flag. Right, so this makes up the most recent part of my career. This is where I did stuff that I wasn't expecting to do. So I worked for the Office of the Public Advocate, and my job was to investigate state-based accommodation for people with a mental illness or a disability. So I had, I think, 150 staff and volunteers and 250 or 300 venues and or accommodation venues, and it was about the size of the UK was my patch. So you would, because Australia's huge, obviously by comparison, we're a continent as well as a country. And it was really, that was something I never thought I'd do, but it gave me huge compassion. I'd never worked with disability before. I'd worked with mental illness certainly, but not disability. And my job was to go in and go, right, well, it's where things got escalated to me. So it'd be things like sexual assault or whatever else where people had been abused. And so really, really key work. And what they did was actually visit every 3 months and just do a regular check unannounced, and then see if there were any issues. And it was just a really fascinating program to work for. And really interesting because we got access to everything. So I could walk into a mental health ward and you'd go and say, can I see your paperwork, please? Or why do you have this person here? Really good check and balance, really interesting. And my first experience as a human rights investigator, and it was enormously humbling. I worked for the Commission for Children and Young People. I wrote the terms of reference for the investigation into Aboriginal children placed in care. And then I also managed a police program that supported people at police interviews. It's called Appropriate Adult here, and went and managed all of that, which again was enormously humbling. I got insomnia from that job though, because I get calls about homicides at like midnight or something, and it just was not great for my sleeping patterns. So I stepped away from that after a little while. Bit of a detour here, again, something different. I broke my back, which was really unfortunate, which meant I then had a disability and then had to learn to deal with that. And so that wasn't quite part of the plan. And again, gave me enormous compassion and I guess understanding of people who'd had a similar experience or were incapacitated in some way. Strategy, right. So I'm going to finish up very shortly so you can ask questions. I'm so sorry, guys. I have absolutely taken up your time. So then I worked for the Queensland youth team because I decided to move back to Queensland after I broke my back. I really enjoyed Queensland. I thought, look, I'll head back up there. Started working for the youth team and then found out they were being shut down. So I wrote the Queensland Youth Strategy and then shimmied over to the police and did the Commonwealth Games job. That was really tough. What I haven't talked about so far, and I wish that I'd had more time to talk about, was how women are treated in policing. That was by far the worst work experience I have ever had. There weren't many females around. I was very senior. I was in charge of a very difficult portfolio. And the first question I got was, well, if you're not here to fuck a copper, then what are you doing here? Sorry to be so graphic. And I remember being like, oh my God, what have I done? And that was said in front of very senior police people. And so my experience there, managing a £20 million budget under enormous pressure, was having to look over my shoulder all the time. What I forgot to mention about Victoria Police is that they're aware of that issue and have done investigations, but my experience there was the same, where my boss spoke to me and gave me some safety strategies as a female. So this is something I would have liked to touch on more, particularly for the Women's Network. So if anyone would like to chat to me about it, please message me. But from a gender perspective, that Commonwealth Games job was the first horrendous time that I absolutely knew my gender had impacted my career. And that was a truly horrible, like, the work I did was great, but my experience there was, I don't have fond memories at all. And it just was not, it matters if you get help, it matters if you get support, and it matters if there's people around you. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if I stuff this up, they're never going to trust another young female again, because I was the only one. I was the only senior young female police member that they had doing that work at all. And I was the only one with a budget. And so it made me a bit of a target. It was quite hard, but I'm enormously proud of what I did, which is set up the Strategic Intelligence Arm and deliver Commonwealth Games on time. But it will help the police, not me, obviously. Like, I did a really good job of helping with all of that, but the work is theirs. But that was a really tough gig. I'm going to leave it there. I'm so sorry. I thought this would be a very short presentation and invite questions, I guess. And I hope that was interesting to everybody.
Well, I certainly found it interesting. Thanks, Emma. I'll start with I wrote down a few questions, but I'll start with what I think might be a funny one. You were working as a bartender at the time that you were working on practices for alcohol prevention. How did that go?
Good. It was all right, because I understood
your sales drop.
No, it was just very, they appreciated having someone who was trying to understand their perspective. So what's trained now in criminology a lot more is asking people their story, not telling them their story. And this is really key. Like, when I asked that question earlier about, I could have said, what have you done that's illegal? And you would have automatically gone, what have I done? But by asking, have I, I've asked you, have you or not, and given you that option. And so what was useful about being a bartender is that I'd already had some, not sympathy, but it's really challenging sometimes. Particularly we had someone with a disability once who looked like they were completely drunk. And, it's that kind of thing where, when we've unfortunately then gone, this is when I was 19, and we're like, I can't serve you. And he was like horrified. So anyway, off topic, but yeah.
Yeah, no, interesting. Okay, well, Janet Berridge, past chair of the club, would like to ask a question. Janet?
Yes, hello, Emma. That was very interesting. I used to be a prison visitor and and a volunteer for the witness service. I decided I wanted to do those two things in parallel because I wanted to see both sides of the justice system down in Canterbury when we lived in Kent. And it was all very interesting, but I found it also very, very frustrating that, for instance, when I went into prison, there were an awful lot of rather vindictive prison officers who'd say things like, this isn't a bloody holiday camp, why are you coming in? Why does your husband let you come and visit male inmates of a prison and this sort of thing? There was a lot of very negative vibes in there, and it used to annoy me. And I remember at the time reading quite a lot about restorative justice, which I understand is something that came from New Zealand and Australia. And I wonder, how has that developed over the last 20 years or so? And is it still seen as something that's, a goal in a lot of cases? Because I think from what I've read about it, that it can have better outcomes than putting people in prison.
Yeah. So the idea is, you're absolutely right. So the thing is do people need to go to prison? I mean, for some things, yes, absolutely. I'm trying not to speak like I'm from the police because it can seem a bit off the cuff. Like, for me, child abuse is absolutely prison. That's where you go. So there's certain people I think should go to prison, but then there's also people who very much end up on a pathway or whatever. And it's really interesting because statistically, and it's particularly men who are criminals, I didn't go into this, but it is like 90%, they either get a girlfriend, they grow out of it, or they keep going. And that is literally what the research is, and that it can be summarized like that. So, but yeah, restorative justice is the way to go, but also understanding why that person's there. So for example, there was a really horrendous, it's a really terrible example, but a young girl we used to have curfews for people who broke the law for young people. and she broke her curfew. But the reason why she broke her curfew is she found out that the person she'd accused of sexual assault had wasn't going to get charged. And so she went out and got drunk. But then what happened was is the police picked her up, followed her, put her in a prison cell, and then took her home. And then, of course, she's obviously deteriorated further and then continued to have that contact with the justice system. So, sorry, I hope I answered that. But that is, yeah, restorative justice is hugely important to me. So I think is it necessary? Where did they come from? What is their story? And there's a lot more understanding of that now.
Okay, thanks. Noel Hadji Michael has fellow Oz. There's a question for you.
Thank you, Val. After 5 winters in Britain, I'm sort of 50-50 now. Emma, thanks for the passionate presentation. My question is, has your journey been a power struggle between the science of criminology versus the culture of society? And are tech and AI changing the landscape well beyond what we see in the media and at the movies?
So there's 2 questions there.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask the tech struggle part? Because I'd like to answer that one again, please.
Yeah. Because I'm saying you've got the struggle between the science of criminology versus understanding culture, but you've got these big dogs like tech and AI that are coming into all spaces, but in particular a space like yours.
Yeah, I mean, tech's really interesting. I think that needs legislation typically. I mean, so legislation governs what we do. Legislation is very slow, very hard to change, does not keep up with tech. Tech now is quite, I would say frightening, but has everyone seen, I think it's Minority Report, where they arrest people before they've even committed the crime because that's how predictive it's gotten. Science-wise, I don't think criminology has an issue with interacting. Past behaviour is the best predictor of future behaviour. But what I think tech does, and particularly other things, is things like Facebook, for example, having algorithms. The more you look for something, the more you find it. That's not normal. So what should be happening is when you go out into the world is that you go and see different things depending on who's there that day. What shouldn't be happening is an echo chamber. Psychologically, that's very dangerous. That's a massive worry. I don't know how you fix that. And obviously, we've just had the situation where, and I understand why, but at the same time, we've now had Mark Zuckerberg ban Trump from his platforms and Twitter. I understand why he's done it, but he has the power to effectively mute the President of the United States, and that's a very unique circumstance to be in. So I'm not really answering your question, but it's something I've been reflecting on today going, 1, we need to get better at it, but 2, what do we do? Because I care about ordering a coffee from my phone or whatever. It's that real pragmatic balance. And I think 1, always make sure you have like a shield on your computer. 2, don't share too much information. But 3, really think about the information you're sharing. But I arguably think that we need to get better at this enormously quickly. Otherwise, we're a bit scuppered.
Okay, next up is David McMahon.
Thank you very much. Hi, Emma. Thank you. Super interesting presentation. I was really interested in what you were saying about different cultures having different criminal patterns or behaviors, as I understood it. And could you give us a bit of a deeper insight, perhaps, into the differences in cultural norms or behaviors in terms of crime between the UK and Australia?
Yeah, so what I would say is that Australia, and thank you, David, because I have had the chance to look at your question on the chat. Australia has a much bigger middle class than the UK does. So there's obviously a vast difference where we have a Indigenous population and we're considered a young country, even though we're 60,000 years old. And how we treat our Indigenous population is not great. Culturally, that's hugely problematic. So, for example, the story I was telling you about, you know, for example, someone who stole a Freddo. A 4-year-old did that, or not 4-year-old probably, but an Aboriginal child did that and was taken to a police cell. And they were under 8 years old. That would never happen to a white person. And so we have massive race issues there. Here, the main difference is we're more geographically spread. Nature-wise, it's very different. But we have better support, I would say, and slightly better healthcare. So I think there's better outcomes. But from a UK perspective, you have very different gang culture. We don't quite have that. And you have a lot of, the class structure is really interesting to me. It's something that's taken a long time to get across. The subtle ways that people are kind of designated where they go. And the ability to get out of that, I would suggest the main difference at the moment is that I think the UK is in an enormous amount of trouble if you have nurses and police officers who can't afford to live, and I would suggest that's the position that you're in. It doesn't bode well for society. It doesn't make a connected, universal society. Australia doesn't have that issue. So that would be, from a cultural perspective, that would be the difference. From a crime perspective, you have more youth gang crime that we don't see as much of. But I also would suggest you have a lot more right-wing extremists that are happy to be out in public and get a voice. It's quite different.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Thankfully, we don't have quite as much right-wing thugs as America, just as evidence this week. Karen is our last quizzer.
Thanks very much indeed for a really fascinating presentation, Emma. Very, very interesting. And Janet very much focused on the visiting, the prisons, etc. We, as a corporate social responsibility programme, approximately 15 years ago, went into primary school where children were very often from a disadvantaged background and where the parents were in and out of prison. How do you believe that this cycle of going in and out of prison can be broken for the child being brought up in a household with this phenomena?
Yeah, so you're saying essentially where prison is normalised for that child and
yes.
to it. Yeah, so I think, look, there's a few different levers that have to be pulled. Ultimately, poverty doesn't help. I mean, you have to give people opportunities, you have to give them food, you have to give them shelter. What I'm a massive fan of is pathways to prevention, where in theory, if you've got like, it's different pillars, so you have like work, home, school, and if you have enough of those things, then in theory, you're okay. And it's making sure enough of that is there. Suggests that even just listening to you talk, they're already low income, that you're already visiting, which shows that they're at risk and you know it. And so a lot of it's about, supporting affordable housing so that people can live and not have to, not have to worry too much, supporting people into good jobs so that they can provide for their children. Unfortunately, criminology and crimes, like, do you know what I mean? You can absolutely see how life circumstances play out child. And I don't think it's fair, because I don't think people are born to be criminals or anything like that. I think that's something that very much comes as it goes along. And yeah, it's very much, unfortunately, a huge societal shift, I would say, and support for that child and giving them opportunities. The free school meals matter. The, giving people school uniform, friends and family outside of their house, that all matters. So, yeah.
And my second question really is the situation we find ourselves in now with COVID, where people are losing their jobs, where children are unable to go to school, maybe where they're only getting their only hot meal a day. Do you believe that this is going to have a further increase in crime, or is it an area that you feel is being controlled because of the interventions that we've seen from Marcus Rashford, by way of example, with the government enabling children to continue having school meals, where education is still trying to be promoted through online learning, home learning?
Two different things. This is where the UK is very different to Australia when you're talking about class, because we don't have a situation which kids don't, as far as I'm aware, would be in that kind of situation where they wouldn't be educated. They'd send out iPads because there's more money. But I think some crime will go down for obvious reasons. Like, I mean, if you go and loot a shop now, you will get caught because there's no one else around. So you can't hide that. Other domestic violence has gone up, which we're aware of because everyone's at home. There's nowhere for them to go. So there's certainly, it just will be a change the pattern and what's happening. I think particularly for kids in that environment, I think it would be terrible. And I really feel for those kids because it would just be awful. Like you're already in a domestic, your escape would be school and that's gone. And it's like everybody now, we're all doing everything at home. And so your home life, again, for that pathways prevention, like that's huge, that's your chunk. And so if that's not good, everything else falls over, doesn't it really? And no one can check on you either because you're not getting that natural people not watching, but you're interacting with society and people can tell if something's wrong if you're out and about, or if you're at school and someone thinks you're underfed or you don't look quite right. That's gone, isn't it? So
absolutely.
I know child deaths have gone up as well in this time, and so it's not great. But I don't know what the solution is because I think in some instance, I'm not quite sure what the solution is, and I would hope that they'd have neighbours or something that they could shimmy to or whatever, and that some children have that, but I just think it would be awful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, lovely. That's our hour just over. So Emma, thanks. Really, that was absolutely excellent. Thanks to everybody who joined in. We got up to some people have left, but we got up to a maximum of 30 people, which is absolutely excellent. And just a little bit of a plug. The 11th of February is the next Women's Network Zoom event, again 6 o'clock, and that is Lady Mary Arden, one of 2 Supreme Court justices, only 2 out of the 12. So please note that in your diary, as well as all the other things from the other clubs and circles. And thanks, Emma, and thanks everyone.